So you may think that this story, my story today, is about this picture because the furniture matches the furniture in Cassie's parents' house that she has retreated to in the film Promising Young Woman. But in fact, my story today is about this picture. I was shown this picture by my brother, who I met for the first time the week before. He was 29 and I was 34. He said this was a picture of my mother when she was a young woman, a promising young woman. She stands on the hill smiling brightly amongst the vegetation of the countryside. By the time I'm with my newfound brother sitting in my mother's living room, Seoul has absorbed the dirt and plants and made the mountain in its own image. Asphalt streets spouting massive rows of apartment towers that is only distinguishable by the numbers painted on the upper floor. When my mother returns from shopping, she finds me sitting there in her living room. It's arranged, since she does not speak English and I do not speak Korean, that my brother would bring me back the following week with his friend who speaks English to translate for me and my mother. A week later, my aunt sits on the overstuffed beige couch and my mother settles down on the opposite side of the table from me on the floor. I too am on the floor, but with the base of the couch just behind me for protection. Then the very nice young woman kneels beside my mother. My brother comes to the head of the table with a wooden decorative chest. He turns the chest lock face towards my mother. She doesn't open it. She just starts to talk. And the young woman translates. It turns out my brother's friend's English is heavily accented Korean. It's with a lilt of Australian because that is where she'd gone for a year as an exchange student. She slowly translates what my mother says. My mother speaks calmly, without tears or warmth. And I grow miserable. I know she's suffering. The young woman translates. My mother was devoted to God as a young woman. She did not want to marry or have children. She was Catholic. My father would wait for her on the hillside. He did not believe in her devotion to the rules of her religion. He raped her and she had me. The translator casts her eyes down. My mother continues. She tried to give me to my father. He took me in for a while, but when his wife became pregnant, they returned to me. They returned me to my mother. She found another man who loved her and wanted to marry her to start their own family, even though he knew I existed. At the time, more than a few orphanages in the southern peninsula of Korea there were many orphanages that received money for the number of children they housed. So the operators of the orphanages would go around telling people poor with many children or unmarried women with a child, they'd be much better off if they gave up their child. My mother decided for the duration of her wedding, while our fiance's family from further down south was up for the festivities, I would be placed in the orphanage to the north, just south of the DMZ. When the wedding ceremonies were over, she would retrieve me. Finally, she came for me. What a shame, the orphanage director said. A family in America had chosen me. My mother decided I would be better, if I would have a better life, if she let them adopt me rather than me living in Korea as a bastard child. She said she was disappointed I was so short. She had thought going to America would have made me tall, but then again, my father was very short. She says she's so proud of how smart I am. She read the article about me and knew that I understood everything, even though she gave me up to live in America when I was 4 years old. She excitedly reaches for the decorative chest. She turns the toy-like key and opens it. Looking into the box, she retrieves an old newspaper. As she looks at the cover story from the 1996 entertainment section of the Seoul paper, she flattens out the wrinkled page and looks down at the picture. She looks up and stares straight ahead, not seeing me. I reach over to turn the page around. She deliberately pushes the newspaper towards me, never changing her gaze. I remember the article, the reporter, the strange worrying emails I received from the consulate a month before about a young Korean man who needed to contact me because he's my brother and he wants to reunite me with me and my mother. My film had been programmed in New York City in a show at the Korean consulate around the theme of adoption in Korean American film works. All the films were shorts. A handful of us were present at the screening and at the dinner for the filmmakers. The reporter from Seoul newspaper was sitting next to me. I told him my story in more detail, that my greatest love was for my mother, that she was always with me, that I longed for her. He went back home to Korea and decided to make my story the story. He thought by reaching out to his paper's readership, they might be able to reunite me with my mother. He had told me at the dinner in New York, I had the heart of old Korea, and young people now in their 20s don't respect or love their parents like they used to, or were still supposed to. I look at the picture of me in the 10-year-old newspaper. Someone had doodled onto my face glasses and devil horns with a ballpoint pen. I feel with my finger the depression in the newsprint paper made by the ballpoint, tracing over and over the fat wideness of my face. When I turn to my brother, he looks embarrassed. My mother finally looks at me. Why do you film everything? I tell the translator, I'll shut the camera off. I wanted to take the footage I shot and have someone in America translate what my mother said. A part of me didn't trust the live translation I got that day. I thought I could make a film where the footage is subtitled in English and I animate doodles over my mother's face so her identity is obscured. Redaction as protection. My friend asked me when I told her about my film idea for the footage I shot of this meeting, are you ashamed? I told her no. Shame is created by society, small, large, for a singled out person to bear the burden of that society's failings. In my case, Korea's inability to care for children born outside of the bounds of their patriarchal values. She shivered and said, but shame is so powerful. Impassive but angry, or impassively angry, I said, I will not be sacrificed for what Korea needs to fix. Could she see that I refused to let shame shrink my world? I did not deserve to be hidden in shame for shame. I could plainly say where I came from and that its stigma would not make me cower away. It could not touch me. But then I realized I'd made a trade-off. When you learn a skill so young, an advanced level skill that should only be learned after many decades of study, it distorts the wielder. I had become as hard and sharp as my power. Now nothing could touch me.
Wow, KimSu.
Yay!
Tell it.
Yeah.